Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Austin Davis. Austin earned a Bachelor of Science in Pastoral Ministry from Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee, and furthered his education with a Master of Arts in Counseling from the Church of God Theological Seminary. This education laid the foundation for his professional journey in clinical counseling and church ministry. Austin is now a leader in teenage behavioral health and addiction treatment, spending the past 15 years committed to transforming the lives of teens and their families, and is the founder and CEO of Clearfork Academy, a leading treatment center in Texas for troubled teens, where he has seen the rise in teenage mental health problems and addiction rise to over 20% of teens ages 12 to 17. Austin has shared insights on effective treatment methodologies, the importance of mental health awareness, and the power of faith in the recovery process with parents, community health professionals, educators, and teens nationwide. I'm excited to have Austin on the show today to share how he aims to shape the lives of teens and their families, guiding them on a path towards healing using effective treatment methodologies, including the power of faith. And with that, Austin Davis, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be here.
Man, thrilled to have you here, my friend. You know, the topic of mental health has been a prominent one on my show. It's a passion that I've got in just trying to put folks like yourself on the platform to share their knowledge and expertise in how to deal with this. And from my perspective, it seems as though mental health issues have been on a dramatic rise in the past, I don't know, decade, 15 years or so. And I have my own layperson, non-educated person's thoughts on why that could be and what some of the driving factors are. But I love having professionals like yourself on to share your perspective and your knowledge in how to deal with those things. So excited for the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your background, man. Growing up, where'd you grow up, and what was your family life like? All those good things.
Yeah, I grew up just north of downtown Fort Worth, a little suburb called Saginaw.
Right
Uh,
on.
so just super middle class family. Um, not a whole lot there. I mean, I was entrenched in sports from an early age. Played basketball and baseball almost all over the state, just all the way up through high school. So, um,
Right
yeah.
on. And Saginaw, for those that don't know, so Austin and I are kind of neighbors because he's in basically the Fort Worth area of Dallas Fort Worth area, and I'm kind of in a city of suburb of that's about halfway between both Dallas and Fort Worth. Saginaw used to be, so when I grew up in the '80s up in Denton, Texas.
Oh yeah.
Saginaw used to be kind of out in the country, but it's grown quite a bit. And
Oh, it's light years different than what it was at, the 8,000 people that it was when I grew up there.
yeah, and so I would imagine if you grew up there back in the day, there's probably a lot of outdoor activity, a lot of riding your bike, is that kind of what you remember?
Yeah, we grew up next to our street dead ended, and my earliest childhood memories are just playing in this acreage that was set. It was a water runoff area basically, and so all the boys would ride their bikes, and we would
Mm,
build forts, and we would throw rocks at each other, and if we had problems, we solved them out there in the
mm,
woods.
yes. There's, man, to just recall a movie. My wife and I just went and saw a movie. It's at the theaters now. I think it's actually probably streaming now, and I'm not going to remember the name of it, but it basically is Um, it's fiction, so it's all actors, but it's based on a true story of a Texas baseball team that ends up going to the Little League World Series
Yes.
and goes pretty far, and they're inspired to really. They start off kind of as the movie really depicts them as kind of the bad news bears, really pretty terrible. I can't imagine they were that bad, but they were pretty terrible when they started, and then they end up getting inspired by their coach who gets sick, he gets cancer, and so he's going through treatment, and then he basically says, I just love watching you boys play, and so they desire to keep playing. So they keep winning games and stay in this tournament pretty deep in. It's a very feel good movie, but there's a few scenes in there that brought back my childhood where in between some games, they decide, hey, we're going to go down to the local sports comic book and playing card store. And so they all get on their bikes, and there's like 8 or 9 of them, and they ride down, to this store. The owner clearly knows them. They hang out there all the time. And they have this kind of fun. They're all, oh, which card do you need? What do you have? And they're looking at baseball cards. And then another group of boys come in that's kind of their enemies, right? Kind of their rivals. And they almost have a scrap in the parking lot. And you think, oh, this is I know what's going to happen. Like the baddies are going to beat up the good kids, but they don't. They kind of both jaw jacket each other and talk some trash and push each other. But then it disperses, right? I think the owner comes out and says, "Hey, you guys need to stop," and so they move on. But it just what you said there about we solve stuff in the park, or we solved it in the
Yeah.
creek bed, and then stuff just is gone, right? So it's like you solved problems back then in a very direct way that was clear. There were boundaries. There were when you went back home, you didn't worry about those kids because they were gone, right? They weren't going to be
Yeah.
creeping on you through your phone or anything else. It's
Yeah.
just a different time. I wonder what your thoughts are on some of that, but
Well, and part of it is, I don't fault my parents. There wasn't much adult supervision.
yeah,
So you learn to do it. You learn when your bike wheel falls off, you learn to fix it.
yeah,
When somebody is being picked on, you either defend them or you don't, and so there wasn't an adult hovering over me to tell me which red tape, that I had to. And I think that's a lot of our kids today. We don't have a lot of free thinkers. Our education system, we can talk about that all day long
yeah,
probably. um but yeah, I think that's where my entrepreneurial spirit just began to germinate. It's because I didn't have Amazon to buy a bow and arrow. We found some reeds in the woods and a shoestring, and man, we were seeing how far that thing would go.
right. You could make
Yeah.
it work. Yeah.
Right.
So true, man. It did inspire a lot of creativity. I mean, I think about just some of the toys that we had. They were stuff you made. Like you'd find a stick or a 2x4, and you'd kind of crudely whittle a point to the end of it and make it a rocket ship, and it was your brain had to be engaged creatively. You weren't getting fed a constant wave of you know the videos, the things we can watch now. Our brain's sort of in coast mode because everything's being pushed in, as opposed to let me create and let me use my brain as a muscle and think about what this thing is that I'm going to have fun with for the next 4 hours, and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Um, and just that notion of, like you said, not having parental supervision. Like we didn't have, I mean, certainly select ball and all the things that kids get to do now. They
Totally.
certainly are fabulous athletes now through all the training and knowledge that they're getting at a young age. At the same time, playing sandlot ball and figuring out, okay, we don't have enough guys. So how are we going to have like an all-time pitcher or an all-time catcher or, whatever to make the math work,
Right, right. The
and,
ghost man on first,
the ghost man on first, and yeah, which is now in baseball, right? They have ghost runners now in baseball, which is stupid. But yeah, it's amazing, right? And you would just figure it out, make it work, come up with your own rules, and have a blast doing it, right? But getting lots of outdoor time, lots of outdoor activity, because there was no reason to be in the house, man. The houses were small. There's nothing to see on TV, and your friends were outside. All the adventure was outside, so you went outside, right? Even if you weren't some, like a kid that loved to camp or something, you just went outside because that's where life was.
Yeah,
It's different
certainly.
now. Did you have so you mentioned you played a lot of sports. Did you have siblings that played sports, or were you?
Yeah, I had a brother that was 3 years younger than me. That lasted for 18 years. He did pass away. I was
Oh,
21. He was 18, on a motorcycle.
oh wow.
So, that's one of those life transforming moments for sure.
Mm,
Yeah, but we grew up, it was Austin and Tyler who went everywhere. And, if there was something going on, it wasn't just me going, it was him, he was always there.
mm.
And our little pack of friends, it was usually an older sibling and a younger sibling. So our little group of friends, was really close growing up.
Man, man, that's rough. I'm sorry to hear your loss there. That's hard. Do you remember? I don't know, any takeaways in hindsight that you look at that you think, man, this shaped me in some way, that
Mm.
I see today, or that, and I don't know if there's anything to share there or not, but I'm just curious. That's a massive, especially if you guys are really close like that. It's such a huge loss when you lose a loved one as a young
Yeah,
person.
I think just the I always play the what ifs. I'm 42 years old, and like, what if my brother's 39 and we're into, there's a
Mm,
lot of those things of would have, coulda, woulda, shoulda, or, there wasn't a whole lot of life. Like we lived it to the fullest, and that's kind of why he passed away, I think, is we wanted sport bikes. We wanted to go fast and
mm.
ride the loop on one wheel. And,
Oh,
uh,
wow.
and so we did. And unfortunately, he didn't come back from one of those.
I got you. Right on. Um, all right. So as you're growing up, do you just have an idea based on what your folks did in terms of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do as I start to get toward college age, or what sort of shape that plan?
Yeah, really no clue. So my parents divorced at 10. And so when I say I figured a lot of things out in the woods,
Mm,
it started at that time. Dad was a small business owner, worked with office equipment and things like that, and mom uh, worked in corporate America. So and there was no expectation for me to go to college. To finish high school was the bar.
mm,
And so that really changed at about age 15. That same group of friends invited me to church. And that's where I found mentorship at about 15, and a relationship with God. And so this idea of calling and purpose and um, working with people, you kind of saw it when you did the introduction. I was like, oh yeah, that was so long ago. I did I did those things. So I originally thought I was going to be a youth pastor, and work with kids in the local church, and that's what my undergrad and then graduate school was basically about. And part of that introduction was I started my seminary journey doing the master's in divinity, again, thinking I was going to be clergy or something.
mm,
And when I'm working with teenagers and the house catches on fire, the kid runs away, or there's a fight or a divorce, or we're not exegeting Romans.
mm.
We're going, dude, what's going on? Let's go grab a burger. Let's hang out. And I had counseling classes, and those things were just coming alive in front of me. And I was like, okay, I think this is a gift and a skill set that really kind of just materialized um later ish, 21, 22,
Mm.
um to do that. So I got my master's in education. I'm sorry, my wife has a master's in education, mine's in counseling. But there's 80 hours of Bible and theology stuffed in there
Yep.
as well. So
Yep. Yep. So when you come out, so you have your bachelor's in pastoral ministry, I guess that's when you were in seminary, and then you come out, get your master's in counseling. Do you immediately go to work in a counseling role or?
yeah, so did what's like case management. So I was in East Tennessee, working at a rural mental health facility. And they gave me like a 92 Honda with 4 million miles on it, and barely a seat belt. And I have to drive out into the mountains to make sure people are okay, make sure they're taking their meds, making sure they got food. So it was a humbling, very educational experience. That was my first 2 years out of grad school. And then my wife and I moved back to the DFW area and continued that work at mental health, mental retardation of Tarrant County, or MHMR.
Mm.
And then started the treatment stuff in about 2010. um, got introduced to what inpatient treatment looks like, and what does addiction really look like at a different level. I saw it at the rural, lower SES income status types folks, but it offends the billionaire just as much as it does the folks on the street.
I was going to ask what you saw in the rural setting because my wife early, but she has her master's in criminal justice, and so she worked parole before starting to have kids and everything. When she stopped doing that and she started to be a full-time mom, but for 7 or 9 years she was a state parole officer, and so she had to do home visits. So she'd go out into where her parolee clients were and had to do those home visits, and that was an education, right? Is
Yeah.
but I'm curious what you saw in.
Oh man, one of everything. I've walked in on domestic violence, and I have I'm a 22-year-old kid with a grown man who's pretty inebriated,
Mm,
intervening there, to aging folks who don't know where they are, right? And so have to reintroduce myself and calm down, or call a child or somebody to come help intervene. So yeah, it's been across the board, in that early career. And I think we study the DSM, which is several hundred pages of criteria. It was just a immersion immediately into what symptomology looks like right in front of you. So it was pretty neat in some ways.
mm. Did you mostly see alcohol addiction, drug addiction? Was it in those early days when you were doing your work? Could it be just straight depression without, an outside influence like alcohol or drugs or?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one lady, because I would do some community-based work, and then I was also an intern. So I kind of had two roles, and she was having these psychosomatic reactions, and to where her like legs would swell up like two or three times. And she wasn't a large lady, um, but her husband was tow truck guy, and was cheating on her. And every time he got the 2 o'clock call to go tow a truck, she would have this crazy psychosomatic response, and her body, um, was like turning in on itself. And it was
Mm,
the craziest thing ever. And so doctors were involved on the medical side. And then, she was referred to us for the psychological side. But yeah, everything. Saw some multiple personality disorders, where Jane comes in one week, and then Ruby the next week,
mm.
and then Jackie the next week. And again, it's like a new person who has no recollection really of our last visit.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, really immersed early on in a lot of those things you see on TV, if you will.
Right on. And then, okay, so then when you come back to Texas, then now you're working in the mental health, mental retardation center. And then how long do you do that, kind of that
Yeah,
role?
about 2 years. And that really functioned as one of those jobs that you love and hate at the same time, because it was redundant, and it was the same thing. It was, I had 75 clients or so to see per month, and
Yep.
do the same paperwork and have the same conversations. But it really functioned as a good learning experience. And I got my LPC hours. So in Texas, you got to do 3,000 hours to get
Mm,
your full license. And so every single week I was clicking off, 40 hours. So that was
mm.
a really good experience. And through that, some of those relationships got connected with the inpatient substance use world.
Yep. Yep. And so from there, do you start your own Clearfork, or is it
No,
just
so with those 3,000 hours, you have to have a supervisor. And so through a couple of contacts, met my clinical supervisor, and he had a couple of counseling practices, and they were starting an adult treatment facility, so 18 and up. And it was in the Metroplex. So I was able to be the first intern, the first therapist, the first clinical director, because he had seen me in my clinical work and aptitude for 2 years.
Mm,
So it was the longest interview ever.
yeah.
Uh, and so did that for about 5.5 years. And um, kind of had this entrepreneurial moment to where I was like, hey, I think I can do this by myself. And I've now got this almost decade of clinical expertise, but then this calling to be like a youth pastor and work with teenagers hasn't left. And I was like, how do I merge those two things together? And that's really what Clearfork became. It was just trying to connect those dots. And because at the time I'm sitting with 30, 40, 50-year olds in a group, and we're doing therapy, and we're talking about life and where they're at now and how they got here. And inevitably somebody starts talking about their 12-year-old self when their parents divorce. And then somebody's like, oh yeah, that happened to me when I was 14, but I also had some major sexual trauma at that time too. And then, oh yeah, that happened to me, but my mom died of cancer. And it's all this adolescent woundedness that 30, 40, 50-year-olds are now dealing with in a group setting. And
Yeah.
so it's like, what if we help these kids 25 years before it amasses into this big thing?
Right. Yep. So at that point, you're kind of refining into, I want to help teens and preteens, or even kind of right in that adolescent area,
Yeah.
um, with behavioral choices more so than like birth, any sort of like a birth, like you mentioned, the psychosis and some of that with some of your early patients. Um, are you still treating or dealing there, or is it more based on life choices, traumas, things that they've kind of life has imposed upon them, and or they've made choices around? Um,
Yeah, I think if a lot of our kids, if they continue to go untreated, they would look like my clientele,
mm,
early on in my career, right? Because I
yep.
just mental health gets progressively worse as it goes untreated. And so our kids today, if they have a um, mental health primary, or their substance use primary, that's kind of where we're at, 13 to 17. And those two things are the chicken or the egg. Am I smoking weed because I'm depressed, or am I depressed because I'm smoking weed?
Mm,
Um, and then there's just a myriad of things that we begin to address to unravel that it may not be either, right? It's always probably something else.
yep. Yep. So let's talk about the kind of this current road that you've been on, and what you're seeing in terms of patterns in teen mental health. So I know in the intro I talked about some of the, the percentage is just incredible to me. 20% of teens 12 to 17 years old have a mental health or addiction issue. So what is that? That's what, 1 in 5, right? Right.
Five,
One in
it's a
five.
lot.
Right? That's a lot. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts there? Either what's causing it? How have you seen it? Has it? I assume it hasn't always been 20%. So maybe 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it was, I don't know, 5%. I don't know what.
Yeah. I think it's twofold. It's um when my professor who taught me the DSM, that's our Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Disorders, right? It's the Bible, or the dictionary of how do you classify symptomology in front of you. And he said, his was like 26 pages. Um, he memorized it, right? Mine's 3.5 inches thick, and there's a disorder for everything now. So
Right.
I think it's one of those things, like when you begin naming symptomology, um, it, it lends to more diagnoses. And when
Mm,
you have more diagnoses, you have a greater population with disorders, right?
something. Mhm.
Right. And so, we solved a lot of things in the woods, which probably could have been classified as depression when my parents divorced, you
Mm,
know, but there wasn't anybody there I saw the school counselor and things like that a couple times, but, um, I don't know. I mean, and our world is progressively different,
mm,
right? I don't struggle with the things that kids struggle with today with technology.
yeah.
And I think that's a large part of it. We knew how to talk to humans because there wasn't a digital screen in front of us.
Mm,
And we just did that. And when you do that, things begin to resolve differently in the brain and in the heart.
yeah. 100%. I've talked quite a bit about it on the show. I try to catch myself and say technology is a tool, It can be used for good, and certainly it has brought us together. So it's a good thing. And it can also, like any tool, it can be misused, right? A hammer can be used to build a house, or it can be used to cave somebody's face in. It depends on how it's used and the user. At the same time, we tend to, I think, toss the keys to a Ferrari to a new driver and say, make good choices, good luck, hope it works out, which is what we do when we give a child a cell phone, or even a 13 or a 15 or 16-year-old a cell phone, mobile phone, whatever, for the first time. And even I know a lot of parents wait, and we waited with our kids until they were, I think, 16 before they got even a phone. But of course, this is a couple, they're maybe a generation older. Um, but even then, they're a new user of a supercomputer, right? That has it's literally Pandora's box in their hand. You can have any question answered 2 clicks from having it pop into your head, the question. And so it's it's frightening, right? The technology, I think, is frightening, and I think is behind a lot of what we're seeing. Again, this is me as a non-physician, non anything. But I think it's driving a lot. And I'm curious what your thoughts are relative to technology, or what's causing this surge in teen. And you just hit upon some of it. Yeah, we have massive amounts of more diagnoses, and so we can more easily diagnose someone with something. I have a friend that David Bidler runs a program called Physiology First out of Maine. He's got a pretty big social media following now and growing. And he said that in Maine, 1 in 4 teens are diagnosed with a mental health disorder and that are on some sort of medication therapy for that. 1 in 4, which is consistent with what we just said, 1 in 5 in Texas, mental health problem, addiction. Uh, so I don't know. What are your thoughts relative to technology? Do you have recommended
Yeah.
approaches for technology?
Yeah. And it seems to be a theme that always comes up. I have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 12-year-old. My wife's an educator. And so we both see the effects. And so we really try to monitor our home and our things. And um, they earn screen time. They don't just get screen time. They don't have personal devices. We have shared family devices. Um, so I don't think the risk is worth the reward at any time. Board game at the kitchen table is much better than iPad and just poking a button. It
Mm,
sucks for me sometimes, right? Because dad's tired after a long week, and whatever, but the ROI on that is so much better for my kids and for me, because we're not just staring at something. Because again, it's kind of that just solving problems together and solving problems in the family unit and community. And I think the science speaks for itself, right? I mean, we've seen the Netflix documentaries and things like that, and how the dopaminergic release and draw and addiction is really shaping, changing in a destructive way society and culture. I love technology. I'm a nerd. Like I love to build technology and things. Um, at the same time, there's a crossover point to where we have to be able to turn the keys off and walk away from it. And um, it's a teenager can't do that for themselves, right?
yeah.
It can't. So
Yes. And so much communication is done through the phone, right? I see teens, and even now 20 somethings, where they're most comfortable communicating through a device as opposed to face to face, eyeball to eyeball, or even voice to voice over a phone. And yet we know human communication is what's the percentage of human communication is everything but the words.
yeah,
It's
97%, like it's 3%.
97%. Yeah. 3% is the words. And yet when we're talking with someone via social media or texting, we're dealing with 100% words and nothing else, right? And yet, so if you and I had a conversation face to face and you said some words to me and I'm reading your body language and your eyes and everything else, I'm so far, I have such a better opportunity to really understand what you mean versus the words that we type with our thumbs of all things, right?
Yeah.
And typically do a bad job of communicating. It's very hard, I think, for some people to communicate, and getting worse as we go. Um, and yet my emotional response is tied to the words you chose to type, which you might have done a poor job of typing. And then
Yeah.
I can hook up on a word that lights up my dopamine response, and rage comes into my brain, and all the cortisol and all this stuff. And you might not, it may have been just a off the cuff thing, right? No big deal. That if
For
we were
sure.
having that conversation in person, I'm like, ah, I know what Austin meant by that. It's, I don't even hear the words, but I know exactly what you meant. And
Yeah.
modern communication, we don't have that. To a large degree, that's been eliminated.
Yeah. We call that the feedback loop, right? There's no, we send a message and there's got to be a feedback loop. And usually it's our thumbs with misalignment, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, having that feedback loop is very important.
Right. Right on. What about since COVID-19? Since the pandemic, it seems like things have gotten significantly worse. And I don't know if it was, I think there was a lot in play during that time, right? We were separated from each other even more so, quarantined from each other, can't see family. Um, More heavy, I think, focus on just use your device to get everything from your food delivered to your door to, you know, because human interaction became even more taboo. Did you see a spike? Because you were deeply entrenched in it at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, it changed our business forever. At the time we had one campus. We had 24, 25 boys on our campus. It quickly went to 38 to 40. And the phone calls were drastically different. They turned into, hey, I'm pulling my kid out of school. I don't really know if he needs to be in treatment right now, but I don't want him at school with all those kids, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
was kind of a huge paradigm shift. Um, uh, and I think, you hit the nail on the head with the long-term effects of it, right? So we saw a spike just out of um, circumstance, but the long-term global effect, you isolate a generation for their formative years, there's going to be issues. So we had 3, 4, and 5 year olds, that are just going to be forever impacted. And then the teenagers, right, who didn't get to experience high school in the same way
Mm,
normal kids or generations did. So, yeah, again, we were forced to be alone, and anytime you isolate, that's where things grow, right? It's mold that doesn't grow in the light.
mm,
Yeah, all the icky things that grow typically grow in the darkness. When you begin to put light on them, you begin to bring community around them. They dissipate really quickly, and we were kind of forced to do that. So felt like I was one of the lucky ones because nothing changed. We already homeschooled, and my business was essential. So
yes.
I woke up every day, put my pants on, and went to work,
Right.
uh, just like anybody else would have. But I didn't have traffic, so
Right. Right. That changed some things, right?
great.
Yeah. Well, what about pharma what are your thoughts on pharma and the role that it has, either good or bad?
Yeah. Was just talking to a couple of folks, actually, psychiatrist friend this morning, and he was telling me some stories of he's about to complete 50 years of psychiatry in the US, and he's seeing we were just kind of recapping drugs that have come out and have been spectacular drugs that have gotten shelved uh, for the newer, less efficacious version, right? Because of money,
Right.
right? Um, and so I see I have this conversation with parents all the time, is that because they want to admit their kid, and they're like, but I don't want him to be on medications. And I say, okay, mom, if he was climbing the tree and he was way up there and he fell out of the tree and snapped his arm in half and he was in a ton of pain, Would you want to give him anything to help that pain? Well, yeah, of course. His arm's, bone sticking out of his arm. And so trying to use that analogy or metaphor with mom is just say, hey, look, the pain will subside, the bone will heal. And then our hope is that we're gonna titrate that medication down. But right now, there's such an elevated level of anxiety or depression or psychosis or something we have to chemically sort of restrain those
Mm.
internal mechanisms. And so once we get talk therapy going, once we get EMDR going, once we get other things supporting that medication, we want to titrate that off. And so I know there's folks that are on long-term medication for depression or anxiety, and they probably really need it, right? But the masses, I don't think. I'm a huge proponent of sunlight and exercise, and we can bring in big food here too.
I was going to ask about nutrition next. Yeah.
Big food and big pharma. I'm a just a real holistic guy. I mean, my wife and I, have a clean home and whatever that means, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's probably the extremists and those who eat at McDonald's every day, and we're probably really close to the extremists and where we get our food and how we get our food and what water we drink and what nutrients are, um, you know, uh, so far my kids aren't on medication. They don't have behavior issues. There's not obesity. Um, and so, I think a lot of big pharma and big food, kind of going back to your earlier question, could be stimulating the mental health crisis. We've seen it for years with ADHD and diabetes, and um, we're the most advanced country in the world, but when you look at our hospitals, we're the dumbest, the fattest, the most anxious, the most depressed. Like we exceed the charts across the globe
Mm.
of all of our stuff. Um, might be what we're putting in our bodies.
Yeah. 100%. And what we're putting in our bodies. Yeah, I totally agree. What we're putting in our bodies and what we're doing with our bodies, and, just a lack of movement, the ability to not move, certainly when the body has moved for, however long humans have been walking around the earth, right? We've done it a certain way, except for the last, call it 50 years. Stuff's changed, and really dramatically in the last, probably 30 years, stuff's changed. And that's where all these spikes started happening. So it's really easy, again, for just a logic guy, just to go, man, everything was kind of trend lines were doing this, and then they just did a hockey stick. And what happened in that period of time? It's a really tiny window of time, and you can pinpoint some changes. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on, and this topic has come up on my show a fair amount too. I have a lot of friends in the veteran community, and that have dealt with PTS, and certainly their friends dealt with PTS and things, and struggled with all sorts of, pharmaceutical cocktails that they just felt like their brain was, in a constant state of fuzz, and then got off of that and tried some of these psychedelics that I'm hearing more and more about, ayahuasca and psilocybin and albigaine, I think, and ketamine is another one. I had a recent guest of the show that was sort of an expert in ketamine, which I didn't even know what it was. But again, turns out it's been around for 50 years and treated one way, or used for one, basically, I think as like an anesthetic, but now had great results for dealing with people with some mental health issues, but also abused on the street. So sort of has this bad
Yep.
reputation to it from the street use side. What are your thoughts on some of these therapies that you're hearing, that I'm hearing more about, or maybe everyone's hearing more about?
There's kind of a phrase that floats around sometimes that there's nothing new under the sun.
Hmm.
And every pharmaceutical compound, nobody created that or thought that up, right? It came from a bacteria somewhere. Penicillin, right? It just showed up, and all of a sudden it kills bacteria. Um, so I haven't, personally experienced any of the organic compounds. I've seen a lot of people have success with them,
Yeah.
and it's the allure to it is, um, a different class of people too that I see accessing some of these things. I'm in a, entrepreneurial community here in the DFW area, and a lot of people enjoy seeking after things like that in a retreat setting, or
Mm.
like, I've never felt this way. I've never been able to relax in my entire life. And then all of a sudden I'm like chill and, not trying to conquer the world or my anxiety every day. So I do think there's a place for it. And you run into, I think you run into a lot of political things there as
Mm.
well, and how, mushrooms and ketamine that costs like a penny,
Right.
uh, could be so efficacious for lots and lots of folks. And so, yeah, with anything, if it works, I don't have any like strong opinions towards it. I think there needs to be some rules and regs, just like everything else. But not so much that you can't use it in, so somebody gets to own the process and make trillions off of it.
Right.
Let the people be the people kind of thing, and continue to access what God has created for us, in a healthy way.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And to me, it's interesting when you follow the money trail, right? And you go, there's really not a money trail when you look at some of these psychedelic therapies. They're not allowed in the US, I think, for the most part or entirely. So people go to Mexico or Costa Rica. And again, my understanding is it's typically a one and done or maybe a two and done, and it's either
Yeah,
going to work for you or it's not. And so there's no long-term, longitudinal revenue stream that's going to come off of this thing. And
right.
when the when the powers that are opposed to that scream, "Don't let that happen!" Right? Keep it
Yeah,
out.
we want you
You
to be
go,
on an
"Oh gosh!"
antipsychotic or something like that for the rest of your life.
Right,
you
right.
know the
It's like
lifetime value of a patient is not very big when you're using organic compounds.
right, right. And so, yeah, when folks like that scream, I tend to go, "Okay, something's got to be up there." Right. Same thing with even during COVID when ivermectin, which has been around forever, people weren't just saying, "Hey, it may not work." Right. This guy might be a kook for saying use that because it's probably not going to work. I say, great, yeah, try it. Maybe it won't work, but it's not going to kill you because it's been around for 50 years and
Yep.
it's a penny, like you said.
And farmers have been using it for for 50 years, right, on
Yeah.
themselves and their kids.
Yes, absolutely. And I had friends that travel overseas all the time, and they're like, "Man, I've been taking that stuff for years as sort of an antiviral, and it's no
Yeah.
big deal. Not going to kill you." And when you have people going, screaming, "You're going to die if you take that," and you're so irresponsible even to say the word that if you said it on the internet, you got banned. It's crazy. And you're like, okay, it's not that hard to figure out that someone's incentivized here to be against this thing, right? That there's no revenue attached to, unfortunately. And I'm a capitalist, right? I'm an entrepreneur as well. But it's still when you're like, this doesn't seem like it. There's like it seems very disingenuous, right? When people are doing that and but interesting. Okay. Let's talk about faith. I want to hear about faith because I know it's a key component of and I want to understand like Clearfork's philosophy and like when someone comes onto your campus, how do you treat them? What's the protocol? Like what do you guys do?
Yeah.
And I know faith is a key part of your treatment methodology. So let's talk about maybe your faith journey initially. And I know sounded like it started at a young age in your teens, and then how the importance of faith, what you see that the role it plays in all of this.
Yeah, it's kind of, yeah, I came to know, Christ at 15, and it really changed my life. And that whole community of believers picked up the mantle to where mom and dad and family unit could not. Um, and that just continued through undergrad and grad school, throughout, my entire life till today, right? Like it just, I had a call with a friend this morning and we were just kind of talking about faith development and how that shapes us as business owners, and how does that make us content, or how does that help us be content? Because we can, if $1
Mm.
million is enough or not enough, then 10, like the number, just add a
Yes.
zero to it. And contentment doesn't come with obtaining things. It comes with a heart or a mindset. And so We delicately blend the two. I want to be as clinical as a hospital and relational as a youth camp when we do treatment at Clearfork. And I have assumption about every single kiddo that walks across our doorstep, and they're violently angry at God, at themselves, and at their parents or someone else. And we're gonna address that anger or emotion whenever they're ready, right? And so if that kiddo steps into my counseling office and it's like, I say, what do you want to work on today? And he's like, I hate myself. I want to die. I want to commit suicide today with, whatever. That's probably what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
Right. And then he walks into the room the next week and says, I hate my mom. She put me here. She did this. She did that. That's where we're going to start. And sort of my assumption with with counseling over the last 20 something years, once we answer those two questions, the third one comes up. And they sit there and they say, hey, Mr. Austin, like, I've heard you mention this God thing. I'm not so focused and pissed off at my mom that I kind of interested at that right now. And that over time just begins to be the answer that we're able to provide. Another illustration I give families when they ask is like, it's kind of like potluck. You may like green beans, but I can't stand green beans, right? So I bring corn, somebody else brings whatever. So we all sit down with our food, and my good friend tries your green beans, and she's like, bro, I know you don't like green beans, but you got to try green beans. I've never had anything like this. And I'm like, okay, get some on my plate. And I'm like, I think I like green beans now. And that's kind of how that faith conversation starts with us, is like we try to live that out in a kind of systematic way through our core values, and not to be covert with it, but not be evangelistic. Because again, we're clinical. We have doctors, we have nurses, we have therapists. We want to address those things, but at the same time, we know that those symptomologies are tied to deeper issues of the heart. And at the very, very root of that, it could just be, I don't know your background, so I'm going on a limb. Like, could just be sin nature. And there's an answer for that in the Bible. And how do we overcome that? And kids begin to ask. They begin to ask. And so we're there with our answer, with our perspective. And it's not a cult environment to where we all recite the same thing, because Megan's going to have different than John or Mike or whoever else on how they respond to that. But it's going to have some of that nucleus towards the Christian faith.
Right on. Love that. I mean, it's, I've talked more and more about my faith on this show. It's such an important thing. And it's interesting in this, I think a week or so ago, a pastor of our church talked about that the Mayo Clinic came out with a study that said, when you serve someone else, when you give to someone else, your dopamine goes up. There's a positive physiological response. Now, he's like, I don't want you to serve someone else because the Mayo Clinic said to do it. I want you to do it because Jesus Christ said to do it, right? And
Yeah.
he's like, at the same time, your body is God made. And isn't it interesting that when we serve others, our bodies are hardwired to feel good and to have a dopamine response? So he goes, I see it as kind of those two things are sort of joined. We do it because Jesus Christ tells us to do it. And then the reward is we get a little dopamine hit and we feel good while we're doing that. And it raises it and it pushes down or eliminates or wipes away depression in that moment. And it makes you feel like, makes you feel great. So let's do it. Not because of the Mayo Clinic, but let's do it anyway. Right.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Yeah. I 100% agree. 100% agree.
Yeah. So what about, so tapping in again to your God-made physiology? I know you mentioned about sunlight, I think, and physical exercise. Any other components that you encourage your patients? You refer to them as patients, right? They would be patients, yeah.
Kiddos, patients,
Kiddos, right,
clients.
right, clients, to do and to sort of engage their God-given physiological response toward feeling good? Is there anything that's a part of either core curriculum or recommended or things that you guys do as a group? Like, hey, we're going on a hike today or anything, any stuff like that?
Yeah, so we've got access to 80 acres on our boys' campus, and it's all treed. And the first thing I did was jump on a tractor and cut a 10-foot wide trail. 7 years ago, we just cut a trail that's about a fifth mile, and there's decent elevation and things you would think it's in South Texas or Hill Country, but we're up here in Fort Worth. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of physical health. We got a weight room, we got hiking trails, we've got high ropes course, especially for our boys, right? Like
Mm.
I think we're designed to have some adrenaline and be adrenaline junkies by nature. So try to if I don't push the limits, they will, right?
Mm.
And so we have to exhaust that thing that's built inside of them every day in order to get to their heart. So I'm also a musician, and so anything that we can do with art, whether it's painting a canvas or a rock, or we use our building sometimes, right, to draw, and or music. So so the arts. I think a lot of folks. I grew up like throwing balls and things,
Yeah.
being overtly aggressive. And there's some kids that I know that man, playing a guitar and a melody is their aggression, right? Like being
Mm.
able to release in that way. And so having having that outlet for them is super important too. So
Do you, what about this whole, the idea of doing things that make you uncomfortable or doing hard things, doing challenging things? Do you all talk about that or work or give opportunities? What are your thoughts there?
yeah, one of our core values is sacrifice. And it's all about doing things that you don't want to do. Like you don't want to, you can get a C and pass the class. But if you really just kind of studied, just for an hour, maybe you'd get a B, maybe even an A. And that just goes so far. We just call it sacrifice, and it's going the extra mile. And when you do tough things, you do get dopaminergic release. You do have, sense of accomplishment, and that's a lot of things we try to instill in our kids with that value is life is so easy, right? It's
Mm.
Burger King on every corner. Now you don't have to get out of your car; you just DoorDash it, right?
Yeah.
And so life is so easy for our kids in terms of just the affluence of life,
Mm.
right? The accessibleness to everything. And so doing hard things is a learned skill. You ask my three kiddos, they can recite that to you all day long
Mhm.
when they're doing the dishes, right? Like, I don't want to do that. Well, guys, we do hard things,
Right.
go talk to the neighbor and you're going to use all of your words. And you're going to have a conversation with an adult you don't know, because that's how you grow up, and that's how you build stamina to be successful in this world. And I don't mean economically successful, but just as a human that learns to serve community and be in community. And if you don't know how to do hard things, it's hard to help your neighbor.
100%. There's a great book, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter.
Just read it.
You just read it?
Yeah, I just read it. I was back in the summer, but loved it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
man, I'm gonna go kill a moose,
Exactly right. So let's go caribou hunt and let's start rucking all this stuff.
Yes.
I loved it as well. He's come out with another book, and I haven't read it yet. But there's so much to that. There's so many great nuggets in that book, just about what you said, which is as humans, we have historically always had struggle. We had to fight for our food. We didn't know where our next meal was coming from. We had to find water, find shelter, and we've done that. And really, most cultures in the world still have to do that to some degree, right? Only the West and a few countries really have, you know, the luxuries that we have, and this whole idea that I don't even have to think about where I'm going to get my next meal. If my refrigerator's full, my pantry's full, and if it's not, I can DoorDash something, call somebody. It's literally going to be at my doorstep. And so we're changing the human condition, and then we're wondering why we're getting a different result. Um, and so yeah, but we can intentionally pursue hard things, which I'm a big proponent of as well. Um, so if there's a parent listening and their child is struggling right now, or they're worried because they're seeing behavioral changes and they're not quite sure what's going on. What thoughts or recommendations do you have for them? Things they should do? Um,
Yeah, we'd love to be a resource for them. Clearforkacademy.com. There are hundreds of blogs we write every year, just for snippets of information, for those who are early stages. But then our call center folks are staffed, ready to answer questions. Just, hey, does my kid need this? Where am I at on the spectrum here? We'll do everything from phone assessment to inpatient, whatever we can to help a family find the help they need. And it's always parents. My challenge is parents always wait till they end up in the ER.
mm,
They always wait till they get kicked out of school. They always wait till they get a felony charge instead of just a misdemeanor, to really do intervention, because they think they'll grow out of it. I think you and I may have grown out of it because we had the woods,
right.
and things like that. But kids, once they're in it, it's very hard, from what I see today, to get them out.
Yeah, right on. Um, and then, so you mentioned inpatient. So inpatient can look like, so they actually stay at your facility. They go in there. And is it, is there a time like it's a 12-week program, or it's whatever it needs to be, or?
Yeah, our scope and sequence is designed for 90 days, that 12 to 13 week model. And that's just because we see that at the top of the bell curve. I mean, we're between, 90 to 120 days, that highest efficacy there. Little, 30, 40 days, a little too small of intervention. And then we get treatment fatigue after 120 to 180 days. Nobody really wants to be away from their family at that point.
Right, right. And there is value, I know, from having friends that had children that dealt with addiction, in getting their circle of friends away from them, getting their
Yeah.
phone away from them, and then even saying, like, once they go back home, like, here's a whole new phone with no names in it. Because if you allow that circle to get back in touch with them, it's so easy to pull them right back in.
Yeah.
So there's value in getting them away from that, right? For
Certainly.
healing. Yeah, yeah. Right on. Any final thoughts? Any hope you would share? I mean, we talk sometimes around some things,
Yeah.
and I feel like man, I paint this dark picture, and I want to know there's hope. To me, I go back to faith, and it's like, you know, Jesus Christ said that we have two missions, right? Serve our God, love our God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love our neighbor as ourself.
Yeah.
That is, and you touched on it a minute ago, Austin, when you said a lot of entrepreneurs can be super successful and yet very empty inside because they just keep moving the goal line, right? I need to make 1 million. I've made it. I still am hollow. I need to make 10 million. I need to make 100 million. It just, and yet if we go back to the simple instruction of Jesus, is love God and love your neighbor. And when you do those two things, man, you feel great. And so I try to go back to, like, when I'm stuck in some social media app where everything is just doom and gloom and negative, and I try to go, man, if I'll just read the Bible for a minute, I will feel so much better than if I look at this social media app. If I just spend a moment to pray or journal what I love about my day, I will feel better. But I don't mean to share my thoughts, but
Oh,
what are
it's
your
great.
thoughts around hope and around just helping people to go, man, it's going to be good?
I think that's it. I mean, it's just the fact that there is hope, right? There's hope in two ways. There's hope here, and then there's hope eternal, right? There's hope in Christ. And so God's placed me on this earth to help kids and to do that. And so in whichever way possible I can do that, right? It'll be both temporary and providing shelter and counseling and things like that. But hopefully eternal, right? We've baptized 400 kids almost in the last
Wow,
7 years who
that's awesome.
made a commitment to Christ and to change. So yeah, there is hope. There is hope.
Right on. I love that. Where can people find you? I know you mentioned the website, but if you'd say that again, and then any other places, any social channels where people can
Yeah,
find you, we'll put links up.
clearforkacademy.com. Like, you put that into Google and we're gonna show up with Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and all the places. Clearforkacademy.com. That's pretty easy to find. So you even type my name in with Clearfork Academy, you'll find my face everywhere. So
Yeah.
good and
Awesome.
bad.
Fantastic. We'll get those links in the show notes. And Austin, man, thank you so much for taking time today and sharing your story, sharing your hope. I appreciate that. I appreciate the knowledge you share with the listeners and just everything that you gave to us today. So thank you so much.
It's been an honor and pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your faith and doing what you're doing.
My pleasure. To our audience, thank you for taking time to listen. Man, give us a review, a rating, all those good things. Share the program with a friend. They all help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.